Okay, let's talk about foods rich in tryptophan. We've got several on the list here. All meat and poultry. We've all heard that. I assume many of you have heard that turkey, at Thanksgiving makes you sleepy. This is one of the reasons why. Tryptophan helps with serotonin and melatonin, which helps improve sleep quality. But also chicken, pork, and beef are rich. Most versions of fish protein are fantastic sources of tryptophan as well. Eggs, cheese, yogurt, and milk. If you're following me for any length of time, if you're doing dairy, because dairy can mimic gluten, so you got to be careful if you're gluten sensitive on this one. My suggestion is play caution around dairy unless you've worked with somebody to rule it out. And if you're going to do dairy at all, my advice is make sure you're using an A2 grass-fed, grass-finished dairy, so that you get a good quality dairy and you're not getting the chemicals and the hormones and the casein, the A1 casein that we know can drive autoimmunity. And then from a legume perspective, tofu, lentils, and chickpeas are good sources. Although I'd be very cautious here because a lot of the soy, which is where tofu comes from, is GMO and has the potential for contamination of glyphosate, as do other lentils. I think it was a recent study showed that these foods, if you don't buy them organically, had the highest concentration of glyphosate in them of all other foods tested. So you definitely want to consider here, you want to make sure you're getting organic. Because remember what we said earlier about the bacterial relationship with tryptophan. The bacteria can metabolize tryptophan, but glyphosate acts on the bacteria. It acts as an antibiotic on your gut, and it decimates the microbiome as one of the potential side effects. So you don't want to get that in you. It's going to disrupt the potential of your metabolic pathways around tryptophan. And then nuts and seeds, pumpkin and squash seeds, both very good sources dietarily of tryptophan. So all these things you can eat. You can get a good amount of tryptophan in your diet on a regular basis by just eating these healthy whole foods. Where I've seen a lot of tryptophan deficiency in my experience when we test people is they're on plant-based diets or they're vegans, and so they're just low as a whole. Now that doesn't mean I haven't seen tryptophan deficiencies in meat eaters too. It's unique for the person, and it's always better to test and not guess. But nonetheless, the greater risk we see clinically is in plant-based diets. So let's talk about if you're considering supplementation, let's talk about a few things as far as side effects. I will say this, I'm listing these side effects here mainly because I just want you to be aware of potential possibilities. When it comes to nutritional supplementation, especially as you get the doses up really high, and when I say high for tryptophan, if you're 1 to 3 grams a day, you really relatively don't have to worry about any of these things. It's not common at all. It's one of the most well-tolerated supplements I've used over the years. So it's when you start getting into the heavier doses, really 5+ grams a day. I don't recommend you go over 5 grams a day without working with a doctor if you're looking to push your dose. But some of the side effects at higher doses they're listed here, GI side effects like heartburn, stomach pain, belching and gas, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and loss of appetite. Neurological side effects like headaches. And this has to do with especially if you are taking it and you're not getting enough vitamin B6 or vitamin B2, because remember I showed you earlier those pathways for how it's metabolized. Some of those byproducts can be neurotoxic, and this is where some of this can come from. So headaches, lightheadedness, drowsiness, and fatigue, blurred vision, dizziness, muscle weakness, stiffness, and loss of coordination, and then tremors. There's a condition called serotonin syndrome right here. This potentially dangerous condition can occur when tryptophan is combined with medications. So this is where there's a caveat. If you're on any of these types of medications, You need to be working with the doctor if you're going to attempt to take tryptophan, and need to be monitoring for these things. But if you're on an SSRI to treat your depression, or on a Mayo inhibitor to treat your depression, you've got to just be aware. Generally, 1 gram or less a day is well tolerated, even if you're on an SSRI or a Mayo inhibitor. But nonetheless, everyone's different. Be cautious. If you're on tramadol or meperidine, be cautious. Symptoms can include extreme anxiety, being easily startled, rapid heartbeats, delirium, severe muscle spasms, and increased body temperature. So pay attention to those things. That's not a good situation to get in. Now, obviously, if it happened to you because of tryptophan supplementation, you'd obviously want to discontinue it right away and talk to your doctor. But it's a pretty rare side effect. So I don't want to scare anyone away from the potential benefits of tryptophan over a rarity of this side effect. You can see here, this was out of the Journal of Nutrition. Occasional side effects seen mainly at higher doses, 70 to 200 milligrams per kilogram a day, which is a very high dose, include tremor, nausea, dizziness, and may occur when tryptophan is taken alone or with a drug that enhances serotonin function, such as antidepressants. This is what we're just talking about, serotonin syndrome. I want to point out, there was in 1989, they talk about, you see here in 1989, a new syndrome appeared. No, it didn't. There's no new syndrome. This actually, in my opinion, set nutrition science back decades, because the new condition, they called it eosinophilia myalgia syndrome, which is, just excuse my language, was BS. What this was a contaminated batch of tryptophan from one company. So one company had a contaminated batch. It was a big company. And so people taking it from this particular company developed high levels of eosinophilia and myalgia, muscle pain. And it was being reported all over. And it was, after it was investigated, it was an impurity formed in the manufacturing conditions from this one company. It had nothing to do with tryptophan. So if you have a doctor that's ever tried to scare you away from tryptophan, saying it causes eosinophilia myalgia syndrome, it's because they don't read the literature. This was a widely publicized and widely investigated event, and it's not a side effect of tryptophan use. It's a side effect of the contamination of tryptophan that occurred by a single company's manufacturing process.